A big Montana welcome to the Miracle of America Museum on the south edge of Polson. This morning we'd like to show you part of our Pioneer Village, which four particular buildings which have historical significance and were run by the stalwarts in the community. So come on and join us. We're on the porch of the general store in our Pioneer Village. There was nothing here when we bought the property in this spot, and we built this out of mostly salvaged lumber. And the general store was such an important part of the community. People would come and buy most of their needs. Usually there was a blacksmith shop or some other specialty. But the general store, they could pick up their packages. They could play a game of checkers by the potbelly stove, share stories, or see how the children or families are doing. So it was such an important part. We still install a hitching rail at this because horses were used by rural families for many, many years. In front of this one, you happen to see some of my whimsical art, taking the form of horses, parts of a thrashing machine, or parts of a wheel from a horse-drawn wagon. The Uncle Sams on each side of the doorway have a particular historical interest to this valley. Along Highway 35, about 4 miles east of the 93 junction, these Uncle Sams are holding up a mailbox. And as a child, I always looked for them whenever my parents would drive down that road towards Kalispell or Big Fork. And it was kind of an exciting to see Uncle Sam holding up the mailbox. Unfortunately, some vandals started firing the grass at the base of them, and they fell over. And fortunately, the owners saved them, put them in their garage. And years later, when we started the museum, I'd never forgotten them. But I went and approached them, and they gave them to the museum, and we thought this would be a nice place to put them, especially regarding the mail. We have a post office inside the general store, which was very common in the early days. Jack Welch was a famous saddle maker of this area. He made a lot of pack saddles towards the end of his life. At the age of 92, he retired from his shop, which was across the Polson Bridge, where the UPS store now is, and went to the Ronan Rest Home. He had donated his large saddle harness making sewing machine, and he just thought we'd put it on regular display. And so I had the idea, well, why don't we recreate a saddle shop? I had room alongside of the general store here, and so I called his son to see if I could come out and take up measurements of his original shop, which I'd been in several times, and told him what I was going to do. And he said, well, why don't you come out and get the stove and the bench and the tool board, and why don't you come out and clean out the whole shop if you're going to recreate his original one. So we did that, and I had a sign specially made, and from an old invoice, I even had the sign maker copy Jack Welch's signature on there to duplicate on the sign. On his 100th birthday, his daughter from Missoula and his son, who still lived in Polson, we arranged to have a birthday party for him, a cake, and the newspaper, Paul Fugelberg, came out from the Flathead Courier and did a story. He had tears in his eyes of gratitude to see a recreation of his shop, which was pretty close to his original. And Paul took a picture of him like he was handing over the skeleton key to his shop. That was put in the Flathead Courier paper, I think first page coverage. 2 weeks later, get a call from a woman who had bought a building on Main Street, which had been Elizabeth Welch's, Jack's wife, sewing shop. She also liked to dabble in painting, acrylics, so forth, but she had a sewing shop, and the new owners found in the basement the sewing center sign and wondered if we wanted it. And I said, of course. So I didn't have time or room to build a sewing shop on the side of Jack's saddle shop. So I decided on the other side of the general store to build a sewing center, Welch's Sewing Center, sales and service. And we have some other things relating to her. So now husband and wife are on the same street. Well, let's take about a half-hour trip up the west shore along beautiful Flathead Lake to the little town of Rawlins. And a new highway was going through there and taking out the S curve on which, on the west side, the Uhde grocery store stood. They sold some general merchandise, but mostly groceries and Phillips gasoline. Fred Uhde was very opinionated and very democratic as far as party goes, and often wrote letters to the editor, the Flathead Courier, and I suppose other letters. I used to read them when I was younger. And you see the signs: free advice, political or otherwise. If you expressed any interest at all, he would unload on you whatever his opinions were about any subjects. When that highway was going to go through, it was going to tear down this store. So we basically utilize things that he gave us or the family gave us to stock the store. One of them being the large counter, which he had acquired in 1934, and then the white balance. It was a computing scale. So there was a big drum on there that, or the scale would compute. It was a certain poundage. It was a scale that would compute the price that it would be. I used to like to go into Fred's store occasionally, look at his antiques he had hanging on a wall. You know, he had an old rifle up there. He had an aluminum prosthetic leg hanging up on the wall, and some Indian artifacts and things like that. So I was always interested in seeing historical items. He had a neighbor across the highway. This was Highway 93, and the neighbor had a service station over there, Standard Oil. The Lewis family built this log cabin gas station. This is a fairly common style of gas stations in the smaller rural towns. And built this in 1938 and started selling Standard Oil or gasoline products. Now, in those days, when you pulled up in your 29 Model A pickup, you not only got gasoline, which the owner of the gas station would pump for you, but he'd wash your windows, wash your headlights, check your oil, check the air in your tire. So this was an important service, and unfortunately, we've kind of lost that in our modern times. But it showed the customer how much the owner appreciated their business. The Lewises also had a couple of cabins that they rented out, like motel units, and they were down from the bank, from the highway. You didn't actually see them, but they were easily accessible. And another way of supporting themselves, did everything you could to make a living back in those days. The interesting thing, not only was there opposition in product between neighbors, whereas Uhde sold Phillips, Lewis's sold Standard, but the Lewises were staunch Republicans. And the neighbors said that they literally threw rocks at one another at times because they disagreed on a political issue. Straightening out the highway, the Uhde store had already demolished. It was really unmovable. But fortunately, the Lewis station was movable. They donated it, and we placed it here and acquired as much of the original Standard Oil equipment as we could. And so in order to move it down here, the house movers picked it up, put it on a trailer. It was getting late in the day. They pulled across the highway onto the now bare Uhde property. And the neighbors all had a good laugh because they said this was the only time the Lewises and the Uhdes ever got together. Fast forward to the year 2000, and one of the Uhde girls married a Lewis son. And we think that's pretty neat. Some people have called us matchmakers on this street here. Well, thank you for joining us. If you have an older relative that is starting to get Alzheimer's, bring them out. The artifacts here, the village will spark memories that maybe get them talking. And We've had people that have met here that used to know each other many, many years ago. Perhaps your visit here has helped you remember some special things with your family members. Share those memories with your loved ones. We'll be waiting for you on Memory Lane.